I am a little nervous, I'm not going to lie. Do we have our first slide? Yes. I don't get slides up there. That's going to be hard. Not because I care about public speaking. I actually used to do it as a job. And not because this story is hard to share, but more, and I only realised it talking with people this morning, it's more because I'm nervous about how the story will be shared, like how it'll be accepted. I want to do it justice, basically. I do want to do kind of like a trigger warning. So as you can tell by my title, it's going to cover mental health and quite severe mental health. I'll kind of allude to or talk about themes of suicide, trauma, abuse and neglect. And I won't cry. It can be deeply emotional, but I've become quite desensitized to it, and wonderful medication that makes me functioning every day also stops me crying. But I first want to provide some context. So only some of the original CV crew are here. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I actually didn't become a Christian until I was about 17, after going to a church camp when I was 16. That church camp I only went to because my best friend went. No other church involvement. And a little fun side thing, Josh, my husband, was the leader. So, yeah, that's the thing. My parents divorced when I was 3. They did go to church before I was born, but because of different reasons and a story that's theirs to share, they stopped going to church before I was born and stopped believing. But they have been able to, I guess when I was first exploring God, I remember going to Mum going, "How do you say this?" And she's like, "Ecclesiastes." I was like, "Oh, okay, how do you know that?" So this testimony takes place over 3 years, 3 years before I fell pregnant with Nicholas. I think it's important to know that during this 3 years, I was studying my Masters of Divinity, so several hours a week I was deeply immersed in kind of lecture content, reading my Bible, very, very involved in learning and deepening my faith. I was attending and volunteering at church regularly. I went to a few conferences interstate for church, and for half of this time I was also working as a pastoral care worker. So I was surrounded by God. And despite this, I still had this experience. Josh doesn't know this next bit. Well, he knows it, but he doesn't know what's coming. I turn that on. I watched Josh walk up the hill while I was looking through the window from my near-permanent spot sitting on the desk of my room in the psych ward. I want to cry, but I don't have tears in me. I watched him walk up and know that though I cannot feel God, he is there, represented in Josh. The night before, I had begged Josh to leave me, to divorce me and live a life better than the one he had with me and my broken mind. He was what was holding me here on earth. For as long as he wanted me and stayed with me, I would not leave. I wasn't depressed, I was traumatised. I grew up with parents that did the best they could with what they had, but that wasn't enough. I often didn't know safety, security, and more often than not, I didn't feel love. I'd been living in survival mode my entire childhood, adolescence, and even into my young adulthood. I went through an entire social work degree without being triggered, without even questioning that my childhood was different, because my mind protected itself. It wasn't until I found myself in an environment where I was loved and supported did I begin to feel a sense of safety, that I could be me and really me and still be loved. Until this point, my mind, noticing this safety, was able to relax the hold it had on the trauma. To say everything fell apart is an understatement. It's taken me, 6 years to not be ashamed of how publicly unwell I was. I didn't know what was happening. I'd lost control over my mind and at times my actions. For the most part of 4 years, I was in crisis. I was in and out of hospital, had countless safety plans, and I also did everything I could to break those safety plans. I wasn't well, and my actions towards others and myself at the time still make me feel very uncomfortable. I was not me, but I didn't know who me was until very recently. Now, I'd love to say that this story is one that was before I became a Christian. God healed me, everything was great. But that was not it. I'd even settle for a story where this was, I hit my rock bottom, God met me there, and I've been great since. Also not. Maybe even I'd settle for a story where I endured this, what felt like torture, but stayed firm in my faith because of God, but that also wasn't it. The reality is that until I look back on these 3 to 4 years, I can only see God now, and it was always through other people. My first stay on a psychiatric ward was the one I described at the start. It was about 6 months into my time of being in crisis. It felt like the scariest admission. It was my first time in a psych ward, and it was terrifying, not because of my safety, but because it felt like a very significant thing to have done. My days during this stay were filled sitting on my desk, looking out the window and not eating much, seeing lots of doctors and doing all the right things to get better. There was endless conversations with Josh, begging him to leave me. I just felt like it would be easier. I wouldn't be a burden, and I could continue to spiral down without impacting him. I could choose to live without hurting him. But Josh stayed. The picture of us was actually taken while I was in hospital, so that's just I was hesitant to put it up there because I look happy, so clearly I was fine. But I think most of us kind of know that that's not how it works. Josh stayed. He was persistent, he was gentle, and he was loving. God showed himself to me through Josh because I wasn't having a bar of God. And when I was ready to be discharged, we felt hopeful. Great, this will be just a blip in my year. We'll look back on it and be like, that was that time I just fell apart. But then that was squashed. We had a psychiatrist discharge meeting, and in that meeting, they told us to get private health or private hospital cover because this will be happening again and again. We were both kind of surprised. We looked into private hospital options, but we, stayed hopeful. I remember the conversation with the psychiatrist, and I'm glad he squashed our hopes because I was going home thinking, I'm going to be perfectly fine and this will never happen again. A year later, I was admitted for the second time. I actually can't remember much from this admission, and I couldn't tell you much about it. I was in the trenches of therapy. I did a 3-hour group therapy once a week, and I saw a psychiatrist for talk therapy twice a week. And the reason I can't remember much of it or of that time was because I was digging up childhood trauma. In episodes of dissociation, the state in which someone disconnects themselves from their body, feelings, and memory was a several times a day kind of thing. That's me holding ice because that was the only thing that would keep me grounded and aware of my body. Prior to this admission, I was being bullied and discriminated against because of my mental health at my workplace. But by the time I was admitted, I was convinced I was being paranoid. While I was there was a group of women, varying ages, but they were all older than me, who were undergoing ECT. Electroconvulsive therapy, anyone? Yeah. This meant they had to stay in hospital for a whole month, and 3 times a week they had their treatment. So they made themselves very comfortable. In an environment where I'm the patient, be it in hospital or group therapy, I really avoided relationships. Having a social work background, working as a pastoral care worker, it's very natural for me to take on the role of the carer. And so I watched them from a distance. Like myself, a few of them were actually granted leave for church on Sundays, and one of them was very open about their faith. I often heard them chatting to the morning cleaner about what they'd read, and the cleaner would share things that he had read. One day I remember sitting in my little alcove, actually where I was having my cup of tea, and the cleaner knocked on the door of this patient and said, "I was praying for you last night, and these are the Bible verses that came out to me." And it was really special because I wasn't talking to God. I didn't want to borrow him, but I was still getting him from other people. I had my Bible with me, and that same cleaner commented on it being on my desk, but I didn't welcome the conversation because I just couldn't. Even though I wasn't talking to God, he was talking to me. I continued to hear these conversations of faith and promises of God, and I was witnessing faith of other patients despite them having such severe mental illnesses. There was comfort in all this, but there was still a longing. And now I want to add a little side note. I've often wrestled with faith and mental illness. I think as a church, be it like Collective World Church, we have made huge strides in how mental illness is accepted and taken in the church environment. However, when those mental illnesses are severe or chronic or lifelong or impacting even the running of things normally within a church, we don't do so well. I've had some very insensitive comments made from Christians. Some of them were very highly regarded, and that was continued on with the people underneath them. I choose to not disclose most of my diagnoses with Christians, but even other people I know, medical practitioners, I avoid it unless it's essential because I've been so hurt. So while I was in hospital the second time, I was encouraged by the faith that these patients had. Patients who were just as well as me, but still were in conversation with God. The third and final admission was my most unwell of all. But in hindsight, I was also in the best place for recovery. And I see recovery as returning to baseline and functioning. I'd been diagnosed with OCD and had been present in many different ways throughout most of my life. It really amped up. Because of my trauma history, there's significant periods of my life or of my childhood that I don't remember. It's just one big black abyss, I call it. So OCD latched onto that, and that's what OCD does. And so then I was forced to journal. I journaled everything, what I did that day, what I thought at that day, what I thought about that day. It took hours. I had a splint on my hand because the amount of journaling I was doing was causing significant injury to my hand. So before I went into hospital, I was journaling 2 to 3 hours a day, and I had to start my journaling by a certain point or else I wouldn't get to sleep before midnight. And I was in hospital because I was a danger to myself. At the risk of dismissing just how unwell I was, unlike the previous 2 times, I was only a risk to myself because I didn't want to live how I was living. I had glimpses of life being better, but then OCD jumped on, and I couldn't see life without OCD. Every other time I'd been in hospital, I was sure that life was only going to get worse. But this time, I could see it being better, but I couldn't live to get to that point. Unfortunately, I had a few years of crisis under my belt, and I was able to hide it well from most people, the severity. And this resulted in me being detained under an inpatient treatment order. So I was still seeing my psychiatrist twice a week, and I was about to see an OCD specialist. I knew that the hard work to get better was to be done in therapy. Hospital wasn't going to make me better. It just is a stopgap. And so I hid it until one day my psychiatrist saw straight through me. And so as a result, I was detained. In other words, I had no choice. If I refused something, it could be forced upon me. I wasn't allowed out of the ward, even supervised, for the first week, and it took 2 weeks until I was allowed to go for a walk around the hospital supervised. I was in a bad space. Unpacking my childhood trauma meant that I wasn't able to connect with my family. I couldn't reconcile what had happened to me while also playing the happy families that we are. So that meant I was very alone, or so it felt. A quick side note, this was my OCD life in hospital. I cleaned my entire room with cotton buds, and on the right was a mixed dish of veggies and rice, and I spent probably an hour separating each bit out. I didn't eat any of it, but that's what I had to do. Being in a hospital forces you to face what's going on in your mind. I often hear people go, I could really use a week in hospital just to check out, not have to do anything. But it doesn't work like that. There's no distractions from what's going on in your mind. You can have your phone, but you can't have your charger. So once your phone runs out of charge, you're left without a phone. And you don't have any screens unless you're in the common area. But then if you're in the common area, there's a lot of other unwell people around you that are very uncomfortable to be around. My journaling increased to 4 to 5 hours a day. When I was in hospital, a few times, I probably did, but I almost fell asleep in the dining area while I was journaling. I was very, very unwell. If I'm going to cry, it's going to be this next bit. Now, I can't talk about this hospital stay without 2 girls who I made friends with, who were also admitted under ITOs. We did movie nights until our night meds kicked in and we fell asleep. We sat in our little nooks and watched other patients. We ordered food, because hospital food, and we shared the experience together. One of them I knew from my group therapy. The other one we'd kind of just banded together because we were all much younger than the other patients. We all had, our base diagnosis was the same, but we were in there for different reasons. These 2 girls had some level of faith, enough that we could talk about it, and after discharge we could encourage each other with it. Unfortunately, one of these girls did not survive her battle with mental illness, and I'll never be the same. God gave me friends in an unfriendly place. I wouldn't talk to God about an experience that he would understand, but he gave me people that also knew it and could give me that comfort. That's something that I didn't fully appreciate. We would sit in our little movie room. The nurses loved seeing us happy for once, and we were able to share the different, it's probably unhealthy, but the different things that we were doing to kind of cheat the nurses and get away with things. But there's no one else we could talk to about this without some level of judgment. I couldn't talk to Josh because he didn't want me to do these things. I obviously couldn't talk to the doctors because that's not what we should be doing. And so it was really comforting to have someone, or have two people who we could be fully ourselves with. In my eyes, I still didn't have family. And it's going to sound very cliche, and I hate that I wrote it, but God's family stepped in. I had friends bring me pizza, but didn't stay because they knew I just didn't want visitors. I had care packages and flowers and chocolates delivered by people who I considered acquaintances. My closest friend has a phobia of hospitals that I have never heard the extent, like it's an intense phobia. But she came for a very long visit, also brought food and gifts. God's family embraced me with a hug. It was a love that I'd never experienced outside my marriage with Josh. I remember being confused every kind gesture with why. Why do people care about me? It's just me. And it's not until many years later that I can look back and accept they care because I'm worthy of love. Even when I do not feel it, God knows it, and God's people know it. I left hospital still very unwell and journaling a lot, but no longer a danger to myself. I really wish I could have a miraculous healing, and I wish the trauma of my childhood and the pain and suffering from these mental illnesses could be taken away in a single prayer. But the reality is that hasn't happened, and God's pretty powerful, but undoing the past, I don't know how that works. I've had moments where God's taken the weight, has given me encouragement, has helped me push through to the next part, but the pain and the suffering have always come back. I believed for a very long time that it was just a lack of faith. I needed to pray more, I needed to be better, I needed to do the right things. And there was an aspect of not wanting healing. I wanted to suffer, but that was the mental illness telling me that I wanted that. There was many times that I even questioned if God even existed, because why would I have to go through this if that was the case? And if God didn't exist, why do I need to keep being here? But none of this is the case. God works in just as much in the process of healing over a long period of time as he does in the sudden healings. I don't love that I've had to invest years and years of my life and a lot of money into therapy. I've missed out on a lot because I wasn't well enough. Josh and I are going on a holiday in 8 days, if anyone cares. It's our first holiday in 6 or 7 years because I haven't been well enough. I haven't been well enough to travel, and I haven't been well enough to go off, be without therapy for that long. And I wish I didn't have to live with the mind I have every single day. I still get triggered a lot, and it's still really hard, but I don't get back to this place that I was. And to be part of God's healing work, or when the healing takes a longer period of time, I get to be part of it. And I get to enjoy the little wins along the way, and I can look back and see God throughout. Being part of this process has made for a richer and more fulfilling life. And I've accepted that I may never be fully healed. I may never have, a mind as simple as Josh, where the biggest stress is, what am I going to eat? Or my toddler woke me up from my nap. I love you. I'm going to be the person who plans, and when they're triggered, I hyperfixate on something and I clean, or I don't journal anymore, thankfully. I've accepted that that's my life, and my life is managing that. I have a tattoo which explains all this. So it's a circle, which represents shalom, peace, wholeness, and it's what we are meant to be if this world wasn't broken. The gaps, there's two meanings. The first is that we'll never fully achieve that shalom on this side of death. We won't achieve that until we're with God. And the breaks also translate in Morse code to Jesus. A little bit corny, but that means that Jesus is filling those gaps. So until I can be whole and with God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit on the other side of this life, Jesus will fill those gaps and I can be whole with him. Some days, and I'm going to say many days, I forget this a lot because you get caught up in life. I get caught up in holiday planning. I work in a school, so I go back to school next week. I get caught up in that. But God is always with me, even when I don't see it. And it can take years until I can see it. These trips into the hospital, at the time, God was not there. But I look back and I can see the pattern of God providing, of God loving and caring and supporting me through. I was fortunate enough to have a perfect match for my therapist. I was fortunate enough to get into the group therapy very quickly. I was fortunate enough for every specialty therapist that I have had to bring in for short periods of time, they've been a perfect match. And that's because of God. That's not just by chance. If anyone knows the mental health system, that doesn't happen. But God made that happen. And I'm done.
Thanks for sharing, Hannah. I think it's such a testament that you're able to get up and to share that way. And I hope for people here that you may not have gone through something as significant as that, but we all go through stuff. And faith is a journey. And that's why our hope is in Jesus Christ. And so I want to encourage you all that no matter where you're at in life, we have Jesus, we have hope, and we're able to keep walking forwards. Sometimes it takes a long time, as Hannah was talking about. And sometimes there's the miraculous healing that occurs. But the idea is that we keep our eyes focused on Jesus. And there's hope in that. And this morning I want to also say that I think it's important that if some stuff has been raised in you this morning as you've listened to that, and perhaps identify with some of it. Just like Hannah said, it was the family of God that was a great support. We would love to be able just to sit and chat through that, because we want to be able to support people. We know that mental health is on the rise. We know, especially among our young people, the amount of depression and anxiety that is there. And I know that there's a number of you in this room that work with people in those situations. But it's out there, it's happening. And together we can support one another. We can't solve all of the issues. And that's why we have professionals that can help do that stuff. But if we start talking, that is the best place that we can start. And we can sit and pray together and we can offer support. And so, if you find that something has come up in your own life or mine through this, please come and speak to me after the service and we'll go from there.